Ever since, human beings have lived between joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and grief, hope and loss. We bury those we love. We welcome new life. We laugh, we mourn. We build, we lose. And yet, we continue. UNkulunkulu UMvelinqangi. If it's your first time around this neck of the woods, welcome. I am truly glad you are here. Now, this is a space where we explore the deep roots of the ideas that quietly shape our lives, the ideas that shape how we understand ourselves, how we relate to one another, and how we make meaning in our lives. Especially so in those seasons when we find ourselves asking again what it means to be human. Over the years, I've come across many stories that have stayed with me, far more than I could ever fit into one series, if I'm honest with you. But today's story is especially close to me because this is a story I grew up with, a story told by my people in Southern Africa. A story that over the years was often filtered through missionary lenses and sometimes misunderstood, yet still one that has continued to preserve something of the Southern African imagination. You know, our reflections on life, belonging, suffering, meaning, and yes, what it means to be human. This is the story of Unkulunkulu. Now, if you missed the first two conversations, the Mesopotamian story of the Anunnaki and the Haudenosaunee story of Sky Woman, don't panic. I got you. I'll leave the link in the description below. Now, as with all living traditions, there are variations in the telling. The story I'm sharing today is only a brief retelling of a much richer oral tradition passed down through generations. Oral traditions are living traditions. They are carried by people, not frozen in books. One of the difficulties in approaching Southern African cosmology is that many of the earliest written accounts were recorded by Christian missionaries. And while these records remain valuable, they sometimes interpreted African ideas through Christian categories. Again, my purpose here isn't to discuss the entire oral history, nor to settle questions of historical origins. Rather, I simply want to listen for what these ancient voices might reveal about what it means to be human. And with that in mind, let me tell you the story. Long before villages and cattle, before clans and kings, before fields were cultivated and homes were built, before fires burned in the evening and children played among the huts, before human beings walked the earth, there was darkness. The earth was barren, silent, a lifeless rock. But Within the unseen realm dwell Umvelinqangi, the one who was in the beginning. His voice was like thunder, and when anger stirred within him, the earth trembled beneath the force of his power. Umvelinqangi brought forth the world itself. He stretched out the mountains. He gave form to rivers and valleys. He called forth earth and all the creatures that would one day dwell upon it. And then, from the spiritual realm, he sent a single seed, just one. It fell upon the earth, and where it landed, life began. The seed sprouted into a reed, and from that reed came other seeds, and those seeds became more reeds, and more still, until the reeds spread across a vast marshland called Uhlanga, the place of reeds. And from those reeds emerged UNkulunkulu, the ancient one, the first ancestor. At first, he was small, but he grew until the reed that had brought him forth could no longer hold him. And as he walked through the marshlands of Uhlanga, he saw others emerging from the reeds, men and women, the first ancestors, and from them came the peoples of the earth. Life continued to unfold. Cattle appeared, wild animals, birds, plants, everything needed for life. But UNkulunkulu did more than bring living things into existence. He also taught. See, he showed people how to kindle fire, how to cultivate the land, how to build homes, how to live together, how to marry, and how to raise children, and how to care for cattle entrusted to them. See, life itself was a gift, but so too was wisdom to live it. For what good is life if one does not know how to live? Now, after establishing the world, UNkulunkulu desired that human beings should never perish forever. So he called the chameleon. "Go," he said to it, "tell the people that though they die, they shall live again." And the chameleon set out. But the chameleon was slow. And before he arrived, UNkulunkulu sent another messenger, the lizard. Its message was different. "Tell them this," he said, "human beings shall surely die." And the lizard was swift. He reached humanity first, and the people received his message. And so death became part of the human story. By the time the chameleon finally arrived with the message of life, it was too late. The first word had already been heard, and ever since, human beings have lived between joy and sorrow, birth and death, love and grief, hope and loss. We bury those we love. We welcome new life. We laugh, we mourn. We build, we lose. And yet, we continue. And that, my friends, is how the story finally arrived at us. Now, there are several things that strike me about this story. The first is this. Unlike the Sky Woman story we explored last time, This story is strangely uninterested in what became of its first ancestor. Sky Woman and her daughter both die and return to Skyworld. The traditions remember exactly what happened to them. But Unkulunkulu, the story simply lets him fade from view. There is no account of his death, no dramatic departure, no ascension. And I find that fascinating because the story seems far less concerned with the fate of Unkulunkulu than with the fate of humanity. Its attention rests on us, on why we die, on how we should live, on what it means to inhabit a world where joy and sorrow are inseparable companions. Life and death are not accidents in this story. They are human conditions. We are born, we love, we lose, we bury those we cherish, and somehow we continue. Perhaps this is why so much of the story is not about creating things, but about teaching. Unkulunkulu teaches people how to live together, how to cultivate the earth, how to raise children, how to marry, and how to care for the cattle. Essentially, he teaches them how to inhabit the world responsibly. Life itself is a gift, but knowing how to live well is also a gift. And maybe that remains one of humanity's deepest questions. Not simply why are we here, but how shall we live? Another thing worth mentioning is that many versions of the tradition speak of Umvelinqangi alongside Unkulunkulu. Umvelinqangi, the one who was before all things, is remembered as the source of life itself. And from that source comes Uhlanga, the reeds, and from the reeds emerges Unkulunkulu, the first ancestor through whom life unfolds and human society takes shape. Now, I mention this because for a very long time, many Christian missionaries attempted to force these traditions into familiar theological categories. They wanted to know which one is God, which one is subordinate, which one is greater. Is Umvelinqangi the Father and Unkulunkulu the Son? But those questions arise from a very different philosophical world. They come from theological debates shaped by centuries of Christian reflection on hierarchy, the nature of God, and the Trinity. And those categories don't necessarily fit what this story is trying to say. The story doesn't seem interested in constructing a heavenly hierarchy. It's not trying to explain how divine persons relate to one another. No, the story is in fact saying something else, something perhaps simpler and perhaps more profound. And it is that life itself is a gift. That existence unfolds through relationship and cooperation. That the source of life and the first ancestor participate together in the unfolding of the world, not as rivals, not as competitors, not as members of a heavenly chain of command, but as participants in the mystery of life itself. And this is what I meant earlier when I said that missionary interpretations often distorted these traditions. See, not because Christian theology is wrong, but because every tradition asks its own questions. And when we force one worldview upon another, we often end up hearing neither. Now, perhaps the most painful and perhaps the most recognizable part of the story is the story of the chameleon and the lizard. I find it particularly interesting that the story does not position death as punishment for primal failure. It does not frame mortality as divine wrath or as consequences of moral guilt. Those, I suppose, are questions and explanations that became central within later Christian theology. But this ancient story seems to be saying something different. The story simply acknowledges death as part of the human condition, not as something good, not as something to celebrate, but as a painful reality with which human beings must learn to live. And even then, the story does not seem to treat death as absolute finality. Its attention remains fixed on life, on marriage, on children, on cattle, on cultivating the land, on learning how to live well together. What I am saying is that the story seems less interested in explaining why death exists and more interested in asking how human beings ought to live in its presence. And what it notices is something every generation eventually discovers. Death comes too quickly. That is what the contrast between the chameleon and the lizard captures so eloquently. Life, like a chameleon, unfolds slowly. Love grows slowly. Children mature slowly. Friendships deepen slowly. Wisdom comes slowly. But grief often arrives with frightening speed. It's a phone call, a diagnosis, a funeral. Life is patient. Death seems impatient. And perhaps that is why the story focuses so intently on life. Because the question before us is not simply, why do we die? But rather, how shall we live knowing that we do? But notice this. Before the messengers, talking about the chameleon and the lizard, before the messengers were ever sent, UNkulunkulu had already taught human beings how to live. And perhaps that is the wisdom embedded within the story. Not that we escape mortality, but that while death comes swiftly, life is still given to us as a gift. And gifts are meant to be received with gratitude. So, perhaps the story's invitation and its relevance for modern humanity are simply this. Love while you can. Share your life with others. Marry if life grants you that gift. Raise children if that blessing comes your way. Care for the earth. Be good stewards of what has been entrusted to you. Build homes. Strengthen communities. And find meaning in continuity, in knowing that life did not begin with us and it will not end with us. For even death itself is not presented as the end of the story. It is part of the mystery of life, a mystery our ancestors recognized without claiming to fully understand. And come to think of it, Maybe that is what UNkulunkulu was teaching all along. Not how to escape death, but how to inhabit life, how to receive it with gratitude, how to care for it wisely, and how to live it better than we found it. I should mention that this reflection was first shared on Patreon before making its way here. In fact, all reflections appear there first before they make their way here. Patreon is also home of our extended reflections. So, if you'd like to sit with these ideas a little longer, or if you'd simply like to support the work we do here, that's the place to be. And if you're wondering how to get there, don't panic. I've got you covered. I'll leave the link in the description below. So, until next time, when we look at another story, thank you for being here. Because learning what it means to be human together truly, truly matters.
Umvelinqangi wena wasemazulwini, mdali womhlaba bayethe. Nkulunkulu sifundise lempilo esingayazi. UNkulunkulu wami Umvelinqangi.